In this video we are charging to victory with the shiniest member of the Imperial Guard, Lord Solar Leontus, and I'll be showing you exactly how to paint him in this video. Let's get started. The first thing I've done is prime both the horse and the Lord Solar in white because I want this to be nice and bright, and I've primed the base in Mechanica Standard Grey. You can use black if you want. This is going to be quite dark. The first thing we need to do is base coat all of the gold, and there's quite a bit on this model. Indeed, there are 2 tones of gold, but don't worry about that so much now. We're going to take some Retributor Armour and paint all of the horse armour, all of the gold on Lord Solar's armour as well. Just make sure we cover everything. Now, we will need 2 coats, but this will be the same regardless if we were going over white or black. With a nice, shiny, smooth gold coat, we will shade the darker of the 2 golds using Reikland Fleshshade. Now, we don't want to flood the whole area with Reikland Fleshshade. We just want to take our time and paint this into those recesses so we get a nice darker line on it. Now, if you want to build up some darker areas, you can do this using a little bit of a glaze, but I'm just going to focus on getting some nice, sharp Reikland Fleshshade lines. And don't forget, I'm going to go around all the lighter gold parts as well. When that Reikland Fleshshade is completely dry, we're going to go in and use Liberator Gold. Now, we're going to do 2 things with this. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to layer over all of the areas that are going to be that lighter gold colour. So we've got mainly all the Aquillas, Eagle Wings, Skulls, that detail. That's going to be a brighter gold, so we're going to paint all that with Liberator Gold. The second thing we'll do with that Liberator Gold is edge highlight all of the Retributor Gold armour panels. Now, this is a really easy, straightforward task. All you need to do is just run the edge of your brush along the sharp edges, and you'll get a nice bright highlight. We'll focus on those brighter gold areas next, and the colour we need for this is white gold from Pro Acryl. Now, if you haven't got this, you could try mixing some silver into that Liberator Gold, but not too much. And all we're going to do with this is, again, base coat all over those areas that are going to be the brighter gold colour. This is really easy and straightforward. Just take your time. If you're not sure, check the box art. We'll then take some Reikland Fleshshade and focus this into the recesses of all that lighter gold. So we're not going to flood the area, we just want to paint it into the recesses. So make sure you've got a decent brush that's got a good point, and take your time doing this. Now, it will flow fairly easily, but don't force it because you will end up smudging it. If you do that, just paint over it. We'll come back to the highlight on the lighter gold later on. For now, we're going to base all of the silver metallics, and the colour we're going to use for this is dark aluminium. You can use whatever you've got. You can use lead belcher, even iron hand steel. Now, all we need to do with this is just be really careful around the gold bits we finished, and also the white part of the horse, because that makes it easier later on. We'll shade all of that silver using some Nuln Oil. Now, you don't want too much of this, particularly when you're doing the sword on the Lord Solar. So just take your time, not too much on your brush, and just work it into those recesses. Again, being careful not to spill it on other parts of the model. We'll highlight all of that silver using chrome from Vallejo Model Air. Now, just take your time, not too much on your brush, and make sure you've got a fine tip. As you can see here on the sword of the Lord, all I'm doing is dragging it along the edge, and you get a nice crisp highlight. When it comes to the joints on the horse itself, you just want to catch those top areas that will catch the light. While we've got that chrome on the palette, we'll also do the final highlight on the brighter gold areas. And we're not going to do anything different here. We're just going to get a nice thin line of chrome along those topmost raised areas by dragging the brush along them. And this gives us a nice bright reflection, which really helps the lighter gold stand out. We'll paint the material elements on the horse as well as the Lord Solar's gloves next. And this is going to be a really easy step. So the first thing we're going to do is take some Screaming Skull and just paint some nice thin layers all over the areas that are going to be this kind of creamy bone colour. Next up, we're going to take some Skeleton Horde contrast paint, but thin this down 2 parts contrast medium to 1 part contrast paint, and we're going to paint this all over those cream areas. And what you'll see is you get a very nice soft shadow appearing. Now, if you want to let this dry and add a little bit more to make those shadows deeper, you can, but I'm happy with just the 1 coat. We'll then go in and add some definition back to these areas just with plain old Screaming Skull, and we just want a good tip on our brush, and we're just going to follow some of the folds and lines and shapes of the model here as well. We're going to move on to painting all those bits that are going to be black next. Now, I'm using AK 3rd Gen black. You can use whatever black you've got, such as a Baden black. And we're looking to paint all of the leather. So we've got the reins, we've got the leather on the belt on the Lord himself as well. We've got the hooves, we've got that piping coming down the side of the neck of the horse. And I'm also going to do the saddle this colour as well. So take your time. This can be a bit of a pain to get off if you spill it anywhere else, so just take it nice and easy. While I've got the black on the palette, I'm going to go ahead and paint the destroyed Titan head on the base as well. I've already used the same silver techniques that I used on the model on those parts on the base as well, so you can follow along with exactly the same colours there too. For the first highlight on the black, I'm going to use some Eshin Grey. Now, this is quite a subtle colour, so I'm not going to go too heavy with it, but it will help to build up a really nice highlight, which looks great on character models. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going going to dry brush this over the Titan head on the base as well. But when it comes to the model, we just want to look for those sharp edges to get nice crisp highlight. We'll then move to Dawnstone to do an even crisper highlight, so make sure you haven't got too much on your brush and you are catching those very sharp raised edges of the model. So just keep an eye out for them on the reins, on the boots, on the scarbat. It should be fairly straightforward to do this. It is all about just taking your time. And again, I'm going to slightly dry brush this over the Titan head on the base as well. So I've got a very distressed black sort of armor colour on that. Now, if you've made any spillages on the horse, then you can go and tidy this back up with some Corax white, which is a little darker than the white scar spray, but it should be fine. We're then going to take some Soulblight Grey and shade this over all of the white parts on the horse. This will give us a really nice subtle transition, and this colour works great for armour, not so much for cloth. I'll show you how to do white cloth in a bit. When that's completely dry, you can go in and start highlighting. Now, the colour I'm using is Bold Titanium White. You can use whatever white you've got, be it White Scar, AK White, whatever. And we're just looking to get some nice sharp lines by dragging the edge of the brush along the sharp edge of the model. We don't want to go too overboard because most of this is facing down, so it will be in shadow. To paint the tail, we're going to go in 3 stages, and we're going to engage patience mode for this to dry, or use a hairdryer. So we're taking black Templar contrast paint, and we're mixing it 2 parts contrast medium to 1 part black Templar contrast paint. And all I'm going to do is just paint this over the entirety of the tail. Now, I'm going to let that dry, and then when it's dry, I'm going to go in with a second coat. I'm going to paint about half of the tail with exactly the same mix, and then when that's completely dry, I'm going to go in and paint a third coat over the back third of the tail, and I'm just going to let that dry, and it gives me a nice transition from a light grey to a darker grey colour on the tail. We'll finish up those lenses on the horse as well quickly with some Baal Red contrast paint, and this is just as easy as painting them over those areas. You should get a nice bright red eye, whether it's the eye of the horse or the lens on the other side. We'll move on to the Lord Solar himself now, and we're going to paint his red robes first. So the colour we're going to start with is Khorne Red, and I'm going to use this to base the back of his cloak, as well as that inside little bit of trim to give it a nice deep red effect. And we're going to paint the sides of his cloak going down his legs as well. We'll then take a 50-50 mix of Khorne Red and Mephiston Red and use this to start to work up the red highlighting. So I'm leaving the Khorne Red in the deepest recesses, and I'm using this colour to paint the majority of the cloak and that little bit that he's got coming down his sides as well, but I am leaving Khorne in the deepest recesses. We'll move to pure Mephiston Red next, and all we're doing with this is just again highlighting some of those sharper edges, leaving the majority of the previous mix in the recesses and Khorne Red in the deepest recesses, and we're doing this for both the cloak and the skirt coming down the side of his legs as well. As a final highlight on all those red areas, we're going to take some Evil Sun Scarlet, and the aim of this is to give a really nice bright red highlight on the sharpest folds of the cloak. So just take your time and work it around to make sure that you don't go too mad and you don't make it too bright, because if it's nice and subtle, it'll blend into the rest of the cloak as well. Next up, we'll paint some white cloth. So we've got that sash going down his left leg as well as the underside of that cloak. So all we're going to do with this is paint some Apothecary White into the recesses. Now, Apothecary White is a little bit of a blue hue to it, so it's much nicer for material and shading that than Soulblight Grey. So I always recommend Soulblight Grey for armour and hard surfaces, and Apothecary White for those softer, more material surfaces. When that's completely dry, we can highlight those highest edges and folds using Bold Titanium White. So again, take your time with this and just work it over the model till you get a nice sharp highlight. And if you have got a wider area that needs to be white, then just make sure it's nice and thin so you don't put it on too thickly and you get a lumpy layer. To base that bluey grey clothing that the Lord Solar is wearing, we're going to take some Fenrisian Grey. Now, this is a fairly thin colour, so you will need 2 coats over the white, but just make sure you block it in and be careful around any areas you may have already come to. If you're watching this before building the model, then I will recommend leaving the head off. It's a mistake I made and didn't realise, but if I build this model again, I'll definitely leave the head off. I'm then going to heavily water down some Fang paint, which is a nice dark blue, and I'm going to make sure that I haven't got too much on my brush. I'm going to dab it over a paper towel before I go to the model, and I'm going to paint this into all the recesses. And this is going to work a little bit like a shade, but we're not going to be going too heavy with this. This will be a nice subtle effect. We can then go back to Fenrisian Grey and use this to highlight those sharp folds on the cloth. And we can also use it to highlight the areas on his thighs as well, which are a bit broader, but they will be quite bright, so there's no need for them to be too dark. Once we finish that, we'll then take some blue horror and use this on the uppermost facing folds of cloth, because this is quite a nice bright blue colour, and that'll really highlight them and help set them off. The last thing we need to do on the Lord Solar is his face. So the first thing we're going to do is take some Cadian Fleshtone and we're going to paint this over his face. Now take your time, we don't want to go too wild and put it on too thick, so maybe 2 thin coats should do the job here. When that's completely dry, we use a little bit of Reikland Fleshshade just to bring back some of the features and depth to the face. Then it's back to Cadian Fleshtone to make sure that we highlight it up nice and subtly, and finally Kislev Flesh just on the sharpest areas such as the nose, the cheeks, to really help it stand out from that gold helmet. If you're feeling fancy, you can also take a little bit of white paint and paint those teeth. It's fairly straightforward, just make sure you've got a little bit on your brush. To finish the base, I'm going to take some Balthasar Gold and paint this all over the trim of the Titan head. Now, for the bits of the base that's not textured, I've just taken some Astra Granite debris and painted this all around the edge so I get a nice rough surface. I've then shaded all the brickwork and the bottom of the base using Agrax Earthshade. I'm then going to take Nuln Oil and I'm going to use this to shade the trim and also the black armour panels and the metallic bits of the Titan head itself. So this can be a lot of wash on the model, so just take your time and make sure it's dry. Finally, I'm going to take some Nihilakh Oxide and paint this around all the rivets, into all the dents and across all of the little bits of Balthasar Gold that we've got on that framework. I'm also going to paint it into some of the cracks of the armour as well, just to help set it off. And that's the base done. We just need to put it all together and we'll have a look at it next. And there we have it. Lord Solar Leontus is ready to command the armies of the Imperium into the fray and to purge in the Emperor's name. I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, check out my other Astra Militarum content and I will see you next time.